The garage smelled of oil, metal, and music. The sound of air compressors rose and fell like breathing, and somewhere between the clang of a wrench and the squeal of a ratchet, a radio played Louis Armstrong. The brass trumpet cut through the heat, bright and careless. When the captured Wehrmacht technicians stepped inside, they froze. To them, work was supposed to be silent, obedient, and grim. But here, the Americans laughed while tightening bolts, hummed while changing spark plugs, and moved as if the entire place followed a rhythm no one had written down. Sergeant Karl Brenner, 32, a mechanical engineer from Stuttgart, squinted at the chaos. He whispered to the man beside him, "In our factories, no one smiles when the machines run." Private Hans Kessler replied under his breath, "Maybe that's why they build more than we do." One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man from Tennessee, caught their exchange and grinned. "Don't just stand there, fellas. You'll miss the show." They had been marched from the barracks that morning through rows of pine trees and muddy ground, expecting another inspection or forced labor. Instead, they found a garage that looked like a world turned upside down, wide open, full of light, filled with radio jazz and laughter. The Americans weren't just repairing engines. They were enjoying it. Even the way they held tools seemed different, loose yet sure, confident without arrogance. Corporal Kessler watched a young mechanic dance around a Jeep frame, one hand on a wrench, one tapping the rhythm on the chassis. Sweat and oil glistened on his arms, and he whistled between verses of "What a Wonderful World." Kessler muttered, "They've turned labor into music." The guard laughed. "In this garage," he said, "even the wrenches have rhythm." That line would stick in Kessler's mind for decades. In that moment, he realized the first shock of captivity was not chains, but freedom. Freedom expressed through noise, motion, and joy. He had lived in a system where efficiency was sacred and emotion was weakness. Yet here, the Americans blended both. Every movement served a purpose, but also a feeling. On the wall above the tool bench, a hand-painted sign read, "No smoking, no cussing, no complaining." It wasn't a regulation, it was a creed. Each man took it as seriously as any military order. Next to it hung a pin-up calendar of a smiling woman in overalls holding a wrench larger than her arm. The Germans stared at it, baffled by how easily humor and work coexisted here. Later, at lunch, when the Americans passed sandwiches and coffee around, one technician asked if the prisoners wanted to join. There was hesitation, then nods. They sat together on the floor, eating in silence. Across from Kessler, a mechanic named Bill grinned and said, "You fix with us. You eat with us." That day, no one mentioned ideology. No one talked about victory or defeat. They talked about engines, Ford, Willys, Studebaker, and about how the radio made the day shorter. Kessler wrote in his notebook that night, "We used to believe work was duty. Here it is life itself." As the day faded, the garage lights flickered, and the last song on the radio played slow and warm. The Germans didn't understand the words, but the melody sank deep. For the first time since capture, they felt something close to peace, born not from silence, but from sound. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. He had no diploma, only grease on his hands, and that was enough. The boy's name was Private Ray Collins, barely 16, with freckles still soft on his cheeks and a smile that seemed too young for war. The first time the German technician saw him, he was crouched under a Jeep, legs sticking out, radio playing something fast and cheerful. When the engine coughed to life a few minutes later, he slid out, wiped his hands, and said to no one in particular, "Told you she'd purr again." Sergeant Brenner stared, amazed. 16? He asked one of the American sergeants. "Yep," says his old man ran a garage in Detroit. Boy's been fixing trucks since he could reach the pedals. Brenner nodded slowly. He learns from a father. We learned from the state. That line carried more weight than he meant it to. The Germans had been trained by institutions, rigid, standardized, perfect on paper, but empty of improvisation. Ray, in contrast, worked with instinct. He didn't follow manuals. He listened to engines the way a musician listens to melody. When the gearbox jammed, he didn't frown or curse. He laughed. "She's stubborn today," he said, then turned a spanner half a twist, humming to himself. Kessler watched in disbelief. In Munich, this would take a senior mechanic an hour. The boy shrugged. Guess we don't like wasting time. At noon, they gathered around the workbench, the air thick with motor oil and sunlight filtering through the slats. The Americans shared cold coffee and sandwiches, teasing one another about who broke more bolts that morning. Someone passed a cup to the Germans. Brenner hesitated, then accepted. The moment felt small, but something shifted. A quiet bridge between two worlds built on caffeine and curiosity. Later that week, Kessler approached Ray. You fix fast, he said in broken English. Where did you study? Ray looked puzzled. Study? I just learned from my dad. Your father? Not army school? He grinned. We don't have army schools where I'm from, just garages and a lot of broken cars. The Germans exchanged glances. Back home, technical education was state-controlled, every step monitored, every mistake punished. Here, a 16-year-old could outperform a trained BMW engineer because he was allowed to try, to fail, to feel. It was freedom in its simplest, rawest form. That night, in the barracks, Kessler wrote again in his notebook. Their strength is not their machines, but the belief that anyone can fix one, even a boy. He drew a small sketch of Ray's Jeep, labeling the parts that had been modified, noting that some of the methods were unconventional, yet effective. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the Louisiana pine fields. The sound blended with the crickets, the humid air, the muffled laughter from the guards' quarters. For the first time, Kessler felt curiosity instead of envy. He looked up at the ceiling and whispered in German, So, this is what freedom sounds like. The garage lights stayed on late that night. Ray, still working on another Jeep, wiped his hands and turned off the radio. Before leaving, he looked toward the barracks, unaware that behind the wire, men once his enemy were silently rewriting everything they thought they knew about talent, learning, and worth. 12 names, 12 states, 1 heartbeat. That's what the sign on the wall said, though it was never meant to be poetry. It was just a wooden board nailed crookedly above the tool rack, each name burned in with a soldering iron. Hank Miller, Ohio; Tom Rivera, New York; Samuel Johnson, Kansas; Pete Dawson, Michigan. 12 men, 12 birthplaces, yet they worked as one engine. The Germans stood before it silently. For men raised under slogans of unity imposed by fear, this kind of unity, built by choice, was almost unthinkable. Sergeant Brenner read each line carefully, his eyes lingering on the scrawled initials. He turned to Kessler. They don't hide where they come from, they celebrate it. Kessler nodded. In our factories, we erase difference. Here, they carve it into wood. Each American had a small story behind his name. Rivera had been a subway electrician before enlisting. Miller once repaired tractors in a family barn. Johnson played harmonica between shifts, and Pete Dawson, the joker of the group, called every German professor. The board wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration of identity, and that, more than any flag, defined their strength. At midday, the garage echoed with hammer taps and the steady rhythm of production. Outside, the cicadas sang like static on the airwaves. Inside, men from continents apart synchronized without trying. One turned a wrench, another passed the socket, another measured the torque. No command shouted, no whistle blown. Still, it worked. Lieutenant Hanley, the American engineer supervising the camp workshop, noticed the German's quiet astonishment. You like our wall? He asked. Brenner hesitated. It's different. You show names here, we only show ranks. Hanley grinned. Rank don't keep engines running, people do. That night, the Germans whispered about it in the barracks. One said it was American arrogance, to mix such diversity and still pretend it worked. Another disagreed. Maybe that's why they win. We fight for a nation. They fight for each other. Anecdotes spread quickly in the camp. One rumor said that Dawson once refused an officer's order to rest until his friend's Jeep passed inspection. Another told how Rivera shared his rations with a German prisoner who fainted from the heat. He said it's just human, someone recalled. For men raised under a banner that divided superior from inferior, this was more subversive than propaganda. As the week went on, the Germans started carving their own names on a scrap of crate wood, tentatively at first. Karl Brenner, Stuttgart; Hans Kessler, Munich; Otto Lang, Bremen. They placed it beneath the American wall, smaller, humbler, but real. Hanley found it days later, He didn't remove it. He simply added one more name underneath. Robert Hanley, Chicago. By then, the wall wasn't about sides anymore. It was about belonging. And in that shared garage, with its mismatched tools and oil-stained floor, 12 Americans and a handful of Germans unknowingly built something that no war could destroy. Respect earned through work, not ideology. When the lights dimmed, Brenner looked again at the two boards side by side. For the first time, he smiled without guilt. "Maybe," he whispered, "this is what victory looks like, not conquest, but coexistence." Outside, the Louisiana wind rattled the tin roof. Inside, the names on the wall glowed faintly in the lantern light. 12 small testaments to the simple fact that unity built by hands endures longer than unity enforced by fear. He came as a prisoner, but someone handed him a wrench. That was how it began. A simple gesture, one that would blur the lines between enemy and ally faster than any speech could. The moment came one humid afternoon when an air compressor sputtered and died. The American mechanics gathered around, scratching their heads, trading theories. Then Lieutenant Hanley turned to the German technicians standing behind the fence and called out, "You there, the one with the square glasses. You look like you've seen this before." Sergeant Brenner hesitated. The guard beside him stiffened, unsure whether to intervene. Hanley waved him off. "Let him through." For a heartbeat, the camp held its breath as Brenner crossed the threshold, from prisoner to participant. The compressor's motor was clogged with oil residue, a simple fix. Brenner rolled up his sleeves and opened the casing, his hands moving on instinct. The Americans watched. "Careful, she's got a bad valve," someone warned. Brenner smiled faintly. All machines have bad days. A few minutes later, the motor coughed back to life. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Hanley clapped his shoulder. "Guess it's your machine too now." The sentence struck deeper than Hanley could imagine. For a man who had been stripped of uniform, insignia, and homeland, the idea that something broken could belong to him again, even a machine, was quietly revolutionary. Word spread through the camp. The Germans had fixed an American compressor. Some guards frowned, others shrugged. One joked, "Guess we're outsourcing to the enemy now." But in the garage, no one cared. The next morning, Brenner and Kessler were called in again, this time without escort. They worked side by side with their former enemies, grease and sweat mixing on the same floor. The air in the shop changed after that. Conversations started cautiously, broken English, bits of humor, mechanical slang. A shared dictionary grew on the workbench: Schraubenschlüssel, wrench, oil filter, benzene, gas. Soon, words were replaced by gestures, nods, laughter. They argued over torque settings, admired each other's improvisations, swapped tricks for cleaning carburetors. There was gossip, too. Some prisoners said Brenner was trying to earn favor. Others claimed the Americans were using the Germans for free labor. But those who stood in the garage every day knew better. Something genuine was forming. A silent pact of respect through skill. One afternoon, as thunder rolled in from the bayou, Kessler dropped a bolt into the engine block and swore in German. Ray Collins, the 16-year-old mechanic, laughed and repeated the curse perfectly. The Germans burst out laughing. That was the first time they all laughed together, a sound louder than any engine in the room. Later, as the storm broke and rain hammered the tin roof, Brenner leaned against the workbench, looking out through the open door. Beyond the fence, lightning flashed. Inside, the compressor purred steadily, proof that cooperation could outlast command. He wrote in his notebook that night, "A machine is neutral. It does not know who wins the war. It only responds to the hands that care for it." The next morning, the Americans left an extra wrench on his bench, unspoken permission to return. From then on, the fence between them still stood, but it felt smaller every day. He didn't expect the moment to come over something as ordinary as coffee. It was late October 1945. The Louisiana air thick with humidity even as the mornings grew cooler. The garage smelled of oil and roasted beans. During a short break, Private James Ellis, a tall black mechanic from Alabama, carried over a battered tin pot and 3 chipped mugs. He poured one for himself, one for Lieutenant Hanley, and after a pause, one for Brenner. The silence stretched. The other Germans froze. In the world they came from, such an act was impossible. Brenner had been taught since childhood that races did not mix, that the order of society was sacred and unchangeable. Yet here, a man whose skin color had been mocked in Nazi propaganda was sharing coffee with him and smiling. Ellis said lightly, "You worked hard this morning. Guess you earned it." Brenner stared at the cup as if it were a live grenade. "You give coffee to prisoners?" Ellis chuckled. "I give coffee to mechanics." That line, simple as it was, cracked something deep inside. Brenner lifted the cup slowly, the smell rising warm and earthy, like the fields back home before the war. He took a sip. The taste was bitter, honest, alive. Around them, the garage hummed, the thump of hammers, the hiss of air hoses, Armstrong still playing on the radio. Kessler muttered to himself, "They live without permission." Ellis looked up. "Say what?" Kessler shook his head. "Nothing, just thinking." That afternoon, the mood shifted. No one mentioned the coffee, but everyone felt it. The prisoners worked faster, quieter, more focused. The Americans noticed and said nothing. Even Hanley seemed changed, giving fewer orders, letting the rhythm of work carry itself. Later, outside the barracks, Brenner and Kessler spoke in low voices. "Did you see how they treat him? That man, Ellis? He talks to officers like equals." Kessler nodded. "If that's weakness, it's stronger than anything we were ever taught." That night, someone passed along a rumor that Ellis had once been refused service at a cafe in Texas while wearing his army uniform. The Germans were stunned. How could a man fight for a country that still denied him dignity? Yet there he was, still fixing engines, still smiling, still offering coffee to the men who once called themselves superior. Brenner could not sleep. He wrote in his notebook, "I saw a man who has every reason to hate, and yet he gave." Maybe this is what power truly is, the ability to forgive without surrender. The next morning, Ellis walked by the German section and tossed a pack of cigarettes onto Brenner's bench. "Keep it," he said. "You've got steady hands. I like that." Brenner nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Inside the garage, laughter erupted again, the same easy noise that had once shocked the prisoners. Now it felt like belonging. And to you watching this now, if you were standing there behind that workbench, would you have taken the cup? Would you have drunk from the same pot that challenged everything you were raised to believe? Because sometimes, history changes not with a treaty or a speech, but with one shared drink between two men who were never meant to meet. When knowledge dismantles ideology, which one survives? That question hung over the camp like the Louisiana fog, seeping into every thought, every sound of the garage. Weeks had turned into months. The prisoners no longer counted the days. They counted the machines they had repaired, the engines they had resurrected, the small victories of creation that felt more human than any triumph of conquest. Letters began to arrive from home, thin paper, trembling handwriting smudged by tears or soot. Kessler received one from his wife, written in December 1945. "The city is cold," she wrote. "No heat, no coal, no laughter. Hans, when you return, bring something we can believe in again." He folded the letter carefully and whispered, "Maybe belief is what I'm learning here." The Americans noticed the change, too. The German technicians had become indispensable. They arrived early, cleaned the benches, tested new equipment. Hanley trusted them enough to leave them alone in the garage. In that space, guarded only by trust, the line between captor and captive dissolved. It wasn't just the machines that evolved, it was the minds. Brenner began drawing designs for an improved air filter system inspired by both German precision and American simplicity. Ellis looked over his shoulder and said, "You'll make Detroit jealous." They both laughed. One afternoon, a journalist from the Ruston Daily Leader visited the camp, curious about the Germans who fix our Jeeps. He asked Brenner, "What do you think of America now?" Brenner thought for a long moment. "You've taught me something," he said. "We built machines for war. You build them for life." The quote made it into print, causing quiet ripples beyond the barbed wire. Not everyone approved. A few guards grumbled that the POWs were getting soft treatment. One even threw a wrench near their feet, shouting, "Don't forget who lost." Brenner didn't flinch. He only said, "We all lose if we stop learning." The guard said nothing more. In the evenings, when the day's noise died down, they sometimes left the garage doors open to the night. Fireflies drifted in and out. Ray played his harmonica, Ellis kept time by tapping a wrench against a gas can, and even the Germans hummed along. It was the kind of music you can't stage, born from exhaustion, trust, and the fragile peace of men who had stopped pretending to be enemies. Kessler began to wonder if he could ever go back, not to Germany, but to the mindset he'd left behind. They say re-education happens in classrooms, he told Brenner, but it's happening here, between the gears. Brenner smiled sadly. Then what happens when we go home? Kessler answered, maybe we teach without words. To those watching now, what would you do if knowledge undid the truths you grew up believing? Would you cling to what once defined you, or dare to rebuild yourself from scratch? Because that's what they did. Those technicians behind the fence, they rebuilt their minds the same way they rebuilt engines, piece by piece, until something entirely new began to run inside them. They went to fix a machine and repaired something inside themselves. That was how their story ended, quietly, without speeches or flags. By May 1946, the war had long been over, and the garage at Camp Ruston was winding down. Crates were stacked for shipment, tools inventoried, engines tagged for disposal. The music had stopped. Even the radio, once filled with jazz and laughter, now gave only static. That morning, the Germans lined up for departure. Their uniforms were gone, replaced by plain work clothes, oil-stained and sun-faded. Each carried a small bundle, a letter, a photo, a few mementos. Brenner's bundle was heavier than most. Tucked inside was a small silver wrench, engraved with the letters USA. Someone had slipped it into his pocket 2 nights earlier. No note, no signature, just metal, warm from another man's hand. Lieutenant Hanley came to the fence for the last time. "You've fixed a lot of engines here," he said. "I hope you fix a few hearts back home." Brenner managed to smile. "Maybe one at a time." Hanley nodded, then reached through the wire and shook his hand. Firm, deliberate, human. Ray Collins, now 17, waved from the garage door. Ellis stood beside him, cigarette in hand. "Guess you'll be teaching us next time," Ellis called. Brenner laughed. "Only if you promise to keep the coffee strong." They laughed together. Pfff. That rare, unguarded sound that meant something had survived the war after all. The trucks rumbled to life, kicking up dust as they moved toward the rail line. The men looked back one last time. Through the open doors, they could see the garage bathed in morning light. Empty benches, coiled air hoses, the faint shimmer of oil on the floor like liquid gold. The journey home took weeks. Ships crossed the Atlantic through calm gray seas. In the cramped cabins, the former prisoners spoke softly of the life waiting for them. Bombed cities, missing families, uncertain futures. But now their voices carried something new. An undertone of calm, a rhythm learned from a garage half a world away. Years later, in 1951, a letter arrived at Camp Ruston's old mailing address, forwarded through several army offices. It came from Munich, written by Karl Brenner, former POW. Inside was a photograph, a classroom of young German apprentices standing beside a rebuilt Jeep, the same model they once repaired in captivity. Below it, a caption in neat handwriting. They now learn both the craft and the spirit. Hanley never replied. He didn't need to. The image said everything. The tools, the faces, the continuity. In that same year, in a small garage near Bremen, Kessler opened his own repair shop. On the wall above his workbench, he nailed a wooden plaque with 12 names. Not of Germans, but of Americans. Ohio, New York, Kansas, Michigan. He called it his wall of rhythm. When customers asked what it meant, he simply said, "It's where I learned how to listen." The story could have ended with defeat and shame. Instead, it ended with understanding, built from bolts, wrenches, and the universal hum of human hands at work. And somewhere, in the fading memory of that Louisiana summer, the garage still stands in the mind's eye, tools gleaming under lantern light, a half-fixed Jeep waiting, and the echo of men who learned that peace, like an engine, must be maintained, or it will rust away. History often records wars in numbers, millions dead, thousands of tanks, endless tons of steel. But what it forgets are the garages, the benches, the quiet spaces where enemies laid down their fear long enough to build something that worked. At Camp Ruston, in that tin-roofed workshop filled with the scent of gasoline and jazz, A handful of German technicians found what no ideology had ever offered them: the dignity of shared purpose. They arrived as instruments of a failed empire, trained to see machines as tools of domination. Yet over time, surrounded by Americans who whistled as they worked and laughed through fatigue, they discovered that machines could serve something higher than conquest. They could connect people. Every bolt they tightened, every engine they repaired, became a form of dialogue. They didn't need translators. The rhythm of tools became its own language. Brenner's notebook, found years later in a Bavarian archive, contained a final line written in uneven ink. "We learned to fix what hate had broken." It was not poetry, but it was truth. His apprentices in Munich carried forward that same spirit, unaware that their lessons were born from captivity. And perhaps that is how history redeems itself, through anonymous acts of humility that no textbook can fully capture. When we think of post-war Europe's recovery, we picture policies, plans, and aid. But somewhere behind those grand narratives stood men like Brenner, Kessler, and Ellis, who rebuilt not just engines, but trust. They proved that peace begins in the smallest moments, in a shared cup of coffee, a handshake through wire, a note scrawled on oily paper. If there is a lesson left from that garage in Louisiana, it is this: the world does not heal through victory, but through repair. Machines, nations, and people all require the same patience: disassemble what is broken, clean the pieces, and reassemble them with care. So tonight, as the story ends, imagine the hum of that old compressor again, steady, loyal, eternal. A reminder that even after the loudest wars, the quiet work of rebuilding never stops.